In a quiet corner of Los Angeles, surrounded by tall trees and winding roads, there was a house that stood apart from the rest. It wasn't flashy or extravagant like some of the mansions nearby, but it had charm, a cozy, understated elegance that matched its owner perfectly. This was where Keanu Reeves lived when he wasn't busy working on movies or riding his motorcycle through empty streets late at night. To most people in the neighborhood, he was just another resident, polite, reserved, and rarely seen outside his home unless he was walking his dog or grabbing groceries. But one summer, something unusual started happening. At first, it was hard to notice. The gate to Keanu's backyard, which usually stayed locked tight, would sometimes be found slightly ajar in the mornings. A few wet footprints appeared on the stone tiles near the pool, glistening faintly in the sunlight before evaporating completely. Then came the soda cans, empty and crumpled, left carelessly on the edges of the patio. These small signs didn't seem alarming at first, but they were enough to catch Keanu's attention. Something was off, and he couldn't ignore it. Keanu wasn't the type to jump to conclusions or overreact. He liked to observe things quietly, letting patterns reveal themselves before making any moves. So instead of calling security or installing cameras right away, he decided to keep an eye on the situation himself. On the third night after noticing the strange clues, he stayed up later than usual. Sitting by his bedroom window with a cup of tea in hand, he waited patiently, staring out into the darkness of his backyard. The air was warm, the kind of summer night where even the crickets seemed lazy. For a while, nothing happened, just silence. Then, around midnight, movement caught his eye. 4 shadowy figures scaled the wooden fence separating his property from the street beyond. They moved quickly, their actions practiced and confident, as if they'd done this before. One by one, they dropped into the yard, landing softly on the grass. Keanu watched silently, his curiosity growing stronger with each passing second. Who were these kids? What were they doing here? And why his pool? The teenagers wasted no time once they reached the water. With hoots of excitement, they stripped down to their swimsuits and jumped into the shimmering blue surface, sending ripples across the calm water. Their laughter filled the air, loud and carefree, echoing against the walls of the house. From his vantage point upstairs, Keanu could see everything clearly, the way they splashed each other, the way they floated on their backs under the glow of the moonlight. There was something almost innocent about it, despite the fact that they were trespassing. Instead of feeling angry or violated, Keanu felt a pang of nostalgia. He remembered being their age once, young, restless, and eager to push boundaries. Back then, he and his friends had pulled plenty of stunts themselves, seeking thrills wherever they could find them. Watching these kids reminded him of those days, of the sense of adventure that came with youth. Still, that didn't mean what they were doing was okay. His home was supposed to be his sanctuary, a place where he could relax without worrying about intrusions. Yet, as he continued to watch, he realized that yelling at them or calling the cops wouldn't solve anything. If anything, it might make things worse. By the time the teens finally climbed back over the fence and disappeared into the night, Keanu had already made up his mind. He wasn't going to treat this as a crime to be punished. Instead, he saw it as an opportunity, an odd but intriguing chance to connect with these kids in a way that might leave a lasting impression. After all, he knew better than anyone that sometimes people needed guidance rather than judgment. As he turned off the light and headed to bed, a plan began forming in his head. Whatever happened next, he wanted it to be memorable, not just for him, but for the teenagers who kept sneaking into his pool. The next morning, Keanu woke up with a clear idea of what he wanted to do. He wasn't going to confront the teenagers directly or call the authorities. Instead, he decided to turn their late-night visits into something unexpected, something that would make them think twice about sneaking into someone else's property again. But more importantly, he wanted to show them that there was another way to handle things, a way built on understanding and respect, rather than anger or punishment. Keanu started by heading to a nearby store. He picked out inflatable pool toys, shaped like dolphins, sharks, and even a giant unicorn. He also bought colorful string lights that could be hung around the pool area, along with snacks like chips, soda, and popsicles. When he got home, he spent the afternoon setting everything up. The pool looked festive now, glowing softly under the twinkling lights while the inflatable animals floated lazily on the surface. It almost felt like a party waiting to happen. Keanu smiled to himself as he stepped back to admire his work. If the teens were coming anyway, why not give them an experience they wouldn't forget? That night, Keanu stayed awake, waiting patiently for the familiar sounds of mischief. Just as before, the clock struck midnight, and the soft thud of sneakers hitting the ground signaled their arrival. The 4 teenagers scaled the fence one by one, laughing quietly as they landed in the yard. They froze when they saw Keanu standing near the pool, illuminated by the warm glow of the lights. For a moment, no one said anything. The kids stared at him wide-eyed, unsure whether to run or apologize. "Hey," Keanu said calmly, breaking the silence. His voice was friendly, not accusing. "I figured if you guys like swimming so much, we could do this together." The tension melted away almost instantly. One of the boys laughed nervously, scratching the back of his head. Sorry," he mumbled, glancing at his friends. Another girl shrugged, trying to act casual despite the embarrassment written all over her face. Slowly, they began to relax, realizing that Keanu wasn't mad, at least not in the way they had expected. As they gathered around the pool, Keanu handed out snacks and drinks. The teens hesitated at first, still unsure how to act around him. Wasn't he supposed to be some big Hollywood star? Shouldn't he have bodyguards or fancy cars parked outside? But Keanu didn't behave like a celebrity. He sat cross-legged, on the edge of the pool, chatting casually as if they were old friends. He asked about school, their favorite movies, and what they liked to do for fun. The conversation flowed easily, and soon the awkwardness disappeared completely. At one point, one of the boys blurted out, "So, you're not going to call the cops or anything?" His tone was half joking, but there was a flicker of worry in his eyes. Keanu chuckled softly and shook his head. "Nah," he replied. "That wouldn't solve anything. Besides, I used to sneak into places when I was your age, too. I get it, you're just looking for a little adventure." The admission surprised them. They hadn't expected someone like Keanu to admit to breaking rules, especially not so casually. Encouraged by his openness, they started opening up themselves. One of the girls confessed that none of them actually had access to a pool. Their families couldn't afford memberships to community centers, and public pools were always overcrowded during the day. Swimming at night felt freeing, like they had the whole world to themselves. Another boy added that Keanu's house seemed perfect because it was secluded, with no nosy neighbors to catch them. Listening to their stories, Keanu nodded thoughtfully. He understood where they were coming from. Growing up, he hadn't always had easy access to luxuries either. There were times when he and his friends had to get creative to have fun. Still, he knew that sneaking into someone's private property wasn't the right solution. As the night went on, he gently steered the conversation toward the importance of respecting boundaries. He explained that while it was okay to seek adventure, it was equally important to consider how their actions affected others. By the time the first rays of sunlight peeked over the horizon, the mood had shifted entirely. The teens weren't just grateful for the impromptu pool party. They were reflective. They realized that Keanu could have made things difficult for them, but instead, he chose to treat them with kindness and understanding. Before leaving, they promised him they wouldn't sneak into his backyard anymore. And though part of them felt guilty for causing trouble, another part felt inspired. Meeting Keanu had been nothing like they'd imagined, and they left feeling like they'd learned something valuable, not just about rules, but about people too. Over the next few days, Keanu couldn't stop thinking about the teenagers. He knew their promise not to sneak into his backyard again was sincere, but he also understood that promises were easy to make and sometimes harder to keep. Teenagers often acted on impulse, driven by curiosity or boredom, and while they seemed to have learned something from their encounter with him, Keanu wanted to ensure the lesson stuck. More than that, he felt a connection to them, something deeper than just being the homeowner they had trespassed on. He saw himself in them, young, restless, and searching for meaning in small acts of rebellion. Instead of letting things end there, Keanu decided to take things a step further. A few nights later, he sent one of the teens a message through social media. It wasn't hard to find them. They weren't exactly careful about hiding their identities. In the message, he simply wrote, "Hey, if you guys want to swim again, come by tomorrow evening. Officially this time." He added a smiley face emoji at the end to lighten the tone. Then he waited. The response came quickly. At first, the teens were hesitant, unsure if this was some kind of trick, but after a short discussion among themselves, they agreed to show up. When they arrived the following evening, they were greeted by Keanu standing near the pool, wearing casual clothes and holding a tray of snacks. The pool area looked different now. It was tidier, brighter, and more inviting than before. Keanu had added a few lounge chairs and even set up a Bluetooth speaker playing soft music. It felt less like a private backyard and more like a welcoming space. "Welcome back," Keanu said with a warm smile. "No sneaking tonight, you're officially invited." The teens exchanged nervous glances but quickly relaxed as Keanu handed them towels and drinks. They settled around the pool, dipping their feet into the cool water while chatting about random topics. This time, the conversation flowed more naturally. Without the initial shock of getting caught, they felt comfortable enough to open up even more. One of the boys talked about how much he hated school and dreamed of becoming a musician. Another girl shared her love for photography and showed Keanu some pictures she'd taken on her phone. He listened attentively, asking questions, and offering advice when asked. As the evening went on, Keanu began teaching them small things, not just about swimming, but about life. He showed them how to properly clean and maintain a pool, explaining why it was important to take care of things that didn't belong to you. He talked about responsibility and how actions, no matter how small, always had consequences. When one of the teens joked about wanting to become famous like him someday, Keanu laughed and said, "Fame isn't all it's cracked up to be. What matters is finding something you love and working hard at it. Everything else will follow." The lessons weren't heavy-handed or forced. Instead, they were woven into casual conversations, making them feel natural rather than preachy. By the time the sun set and the stars appeared above, the teens realized they weren't just learning practical skills. They were gaining insight into how to navigate life with integrity and purpose. Word of what happened spread quickly among their friends. At first, the other kids in the neighborhood thought it was too good to be true. Keanu Reeves, a Hollywood star, had not only forgiven them for trespassing, but was actually hanging out with them. It sounded like something out of a movie. But as the original group of teens eagerly recounted their experiences, others became curious. Some started approaching Keanu directly, either to apologize for past pranks or simply to introduce themselves. To their surprise, he welcomed them all with the same warmth and humility. Soon, Keanu's backyard became an unofficial gathering spot for local teenagers. On certain evenings, you could find a handful of kids lounging by the pool, sharing stories and laughter under the glow of fairy lights. Keanu didn't mind the company. In fact, he enjoyed it. He liked hearing about their dreams, fears, and struggles. For many of them, having someone like Keanu listen without judgment was a rare gift. Adults in their lives often dismissed their opinions or told them what to do, but Keanu treated them as equals, offering guidance without imposing it. One evening, as the teens were leaving, one of the boys turned to Keanu and said, "You know, you're nothing like I thought you'd be." When Keanu asked what he meant, the boy shrugged and replied, "I don't know. I guess I expected you to be, like, untouchable or something, but you're just normal." Keanu chuckled at that. "Normal's not so bad," he said. "Besides, we're all just people trying to figure things out." That comment stuck with the teens long after they left. For the first time, they saw Keanu not as a distant celebrity but as a real person, someone who understood their world because he had once been part of it. And though none of them would admit it openly, they began to look up to him, not for his fame or success, but for the way he carried himself with kindness and patience. Little did they know, those qualities would leave a far greater impact on their lives than any movie role ever could. As the weeks went by, Keanu's backyard transformed into more than just a place to swim. It became a kind of sanctuary for the teenagers, a space where they could escape the pressures of school, family, and life in general. What started as an impromptu pool party had evolved into something much deeper. Keanu didn't set any rules or expectations. He simply let things unfold naturally. Some evenings, only a few teens would show up, while other nights, there would be a larger group. No matter how many came, Keanu made sure everyone felt welcome. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky with streaks of orange and pink, one of the girls brought her guitar. She was shy about it at first, tucking it under her arm like it might disappear if she held it too loosely. But when Keanu noticed, he encouraged her to play something. "Come on," he said with a grin. "Let's hear what you got." Hesitant but eager to impress, she strummed a few chords and began singing softly. Her voice wavered at first, but as the music filled the air, her confidence grew. By the end of the song, the entire group was clapping and cheering. That moment sparked something new. From then on, the gatherings became more than just casual hangouts. They turned into creative sessions. Kids who loved art brought sketchpads and shared their drawings. Those who wrote poetry read their work aloud, their voices trembling with nervousness but also pride. Others showed off dance moves or practiced tricks on skateboards they'd brought along. Keanu watched it all with quiet admiration, occasionally chiming in with advice or encouragement. He never pushed anyone to perform, but his presence alone seemed to inspire them to share parts of themselves they usually kept hidden. During one of these evenings, a boy named Jake hesitated before pulling out a notebook. His hand shook slightly as he flipped through the pages, searching for the right poem to read. When he finally began, his words were raw and honest, speaking of struggles with self-doubt and the weight of expectations from his parents. The group listened intently, their usual chatter replaced by silence. When Jake finished, no one clapped. Instead, they sat quietly, letting the weight of his words sink in. Then Keanu spoke up. "That was powerful," he said gently. "You have a gift. Don't stop writing." Jake looked down, embarrassed, but clearly moved. For years, he'd kept his poems to himself, afraid of being judged or misunderstood. Hearing Keanu's praise meant more to him than he could put into words. That night, as he walked home, he felt a spark of hope, a belief that maybe his dreams weren't as unreachable as he'd thought. Keanu's influence extended beyond creativity. He often shared stories from his own life, talking openly about his struggles and triumphs. He told them about losing loved ones and how those experiences had shaped him. He spoke about facing rejection in Hollywood and learning to persevere despite setbacks. These conversations weren't lectures. They were heartfelt exchanges that helped the teen see challenges in a new light. They realized that even someone as successful as Keanu had faced hardships, and that gave them courage to face their own. One evening, a girl named Mia asked Keanu a question that had been on her mind for a while. "How do you stay so calm all the time?" she blurted out. "Like, doesn't stuff ever get to you?" Keanu smiled thoughtfully before answering. "Of course it does," he said. "Life throws curveballs at everyone, but I think the key is finding ways to deal with it. For me, it's motorcycles, movies, and spending time with people I care about. You guys need to figure out what helps you feel grounded." Mia nodded slowly, absorbing his words. She had always assumed that celebrities lived perfect lives, untouched by stress or sadness. Hearing Keanu admit otherwise changed her perspective. Maybe she didn't have to pretend everything was fine all the time either. Maybe it was okay to ask for help when she needed it. The bond between Keanu and the teens continued to grow stronger. They stopped seeing him as just a neighbor or a celebrity. To them, he became a mentor, a friend, and sometimes even a confidant. On quieter nights when fewer people showed up, Keanu would sit with them for hours, discussing everything from college applications to relationships. He offered practical advice whenever they asked, but mostly listened, letting them vent or dream out loud. In return, the teens promised to respect his privacy and boundaries, knowing how much trust he had placed in them by opening his home. News of Keanu's unusual friendship with the neighborhood kids eventually reached the adults in the community. At first, some parents were skeptical. Wasn't it strange for a famous actor to spend so much time with teenagers? But as stories spread about how Keanu was helping guide these kids, skepticism turned into gratitude. Parents noticed changes in their children, improved attitudes, renewed motivation, and a sense of purpose they hadn't seen before. One mother even approached Keanu to thank him personally. "You've done more for my son than I ever could," she said, tears glistening in her eyes. Keanu brushed off the compliment modestly, saying he was just doing what anyone else would do. For the teens, the impact of Keanu's kindness was profound. They began thinking twice before making reckless decisions, not because they feared punishment, but because they wanted to live up to the example he had set. Sneaking into pools or anyone's property was no longer appealing. Instead, they found joy in creating their own adventures, whether it was organizing a neighborhood cleanup or starting a small book club. Their world felt bigger now, full of possibilities they hadn't considered before. And yet none of this would have happened if Keanu had chosen anger over understanding that first night. By treating the teens with patience and empathy, he had shown them that mistakes didn't define them. It was how they responded to those mistakes that truly mattered. As summer faded into fall and the days grew shorter, the teens knew their visits to Keanu's backyard wouldn't last forever. But what they took away from those evenings, the lessons, the laughter, and the connection, would stay with them for a lifetime. As autumn arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and golden leaves that crunched underfoot, the gatherings at Keanu's backyard began to change. The pool was used less frequently now, its surface often still and untouched except for the occasional leaf floating gently on top. But the bond between Keanu and the teens remained as strong as ever. What had started as a series of late-night swims had grown into something far more meaningful, a connection built on trust, understanding, and mutual respect. On one crisp October evening, Keanu invited the group over for what he called a bonfire night. He set up a small fire pit in the corner of his yard, surrounded by chairs and blankets to keep everyone warm. The teens arrived carrying marshmallows, chocolate bars, and stories to share. As the flames crackled and sparks danced upward, they settled in close, their faces glowing orange in the firelight. It felt different from the pool parties, quieter, cozier, and somehow more intimate. Keanu broke the silence first, asking each of them to talk about something they were proud of accomplishing recently. At first, the teens hesitated, unsure what counted as an accomplishment. One boy mentioned finally passing a math test he'd been struggling with for months. A girl talked about standing up to a bully at school, even though it had scared her. Another shared how she'd taken care of her younger siblings while her mom worked long hours. Each story was met with applause and cheers, no matter how big or small it seemed. For many of them, this was the first time anyone had celebrated their efforts so openly. When it was Keanu's turn, he surprised them by talking about failure rather than success. "I've messed up plenty of times," he admitted, poking at the fire with a stick. "There were roles I didn't get, projects that fell apart, and moments when I thought I'd never bounce back. But every time, those failures taught me something valuable. They made me stronger." His honesty struck a chord with the group. In a world where social media often showcased only perfection, hearing someone like Keanu talk about struggles felt refreshingly real. It reminded them that setbacks weren't the end. They were just part of the journey. That night, as they roasted marshmallows and laughed until their sides hurt, the teens realized how much they valued these moments. They weren't just hanging out. They were growing together. Over time, Keanu began encouraging the teens to take initiative in organizing their own activities. Instead of relying on him to plan everything, he challenged them to come up with ideas and lead the way. At first, they were hesitant, worried they might disappoint him or do something wrong, but Keanu reassured them, saying, "You don't need me for everything. You're capable of amazing things on your own." Inspired by his words, the teens decided to host a neighborhood art showcase. They transformed Keanu's backyard into a mini gallery, displaying paintings, sculptures, and photographs created by local kids. Some performed songs or recited poetry, while others showcased skateboarding tricks or breakdancing routines. The event drew neighbors of all ages, turning into a lively celebration of creativity and community. Watching the teens take charge filled Keanu with pride. He saw leadership qualities emerging in them, qualities they hadn't known they possessed, but not everything was smooth sailing. There were moments when old habits crept back in. One evening, a couple of the teens showed up looking guilty, admitting they'd gotten into trouble for spray painting graffiti on a nearby wall. Keanu didn't yell or lecture them. Instead, he asked them why they'd done it. They explained that they'd wanted to leave their mark, to feel like they mattered in a world that often ignored them. Keanu nodded thoughtfully, then suggested, an alternative. Instead of vandalizing property, why not create murals legally? He offered to help them find walls where they could paint with permission, turning their energy into something positive. The idea excited them, and soon they were brainstorming designs and reaching out to local businesses for support. When the first mural went up, a vibrant depiction of trees and stars, it became a symbol of hope and transformation. Passers-by stopped to admire it, snapping photos and leaving comments about how it brightened the area. For the teens, seeing their work appreciated reinforced the lesson Keanu had been teaching all along. Actions could inspire change, but only if they came from a place of respect and responsibility. As winter approached, the gatherings became less frequent, limited by colder weather and busy schedules. Schoolwork piled up, sports season started, and some of the teens took on after-school jobs. Yet even as life pulled them in different directions, they stayed connected. They formed a group chat to keep in touch, sharing updates, memes, and reminders of the lessons they'd learned. Whenever someone faced a challenge, the others rallied around them, offering advice or simply listening. And whenever Keanu sent a message checking in, they responded eagerly, grateful for his continued support. One chilly December evening, the teens gathered at Keanu's house one last time before the holidays. The pool was covered now, and the backyard looked bare compared to the lively summer nights they remembered. But the warmth of their friendship filled the space. Keanu handed out hot cocoa and cookies, then stood quietly as the teens exchanged gifts they'd made for each other. Handwritten notes, handmade bracelets, and drawings tucked carefully into envelopes. As the night wound down, Keanu spoke softly, his voice carrying through the quiet air. "This isn't goodbye," he said. "We'll always have this bond. But remember, you don't need me to guide you anymore. You've grown so much, and I'm proud of who you're becoming. Keep supporting each other, keep chasing your dreams, and never forget that kindness matters." His words lingered in the frosty air, settling deep within their hearts. As they hugged him goodbye and headed home. The teens knew this chapter of their lives was coming to an end, but it wasn't really an ending. It was a beginning. Armed with newfound confidence and a sense of purpose, they stepped forward into the future, carrying Keanu's lessons with them wherever they went. And though Keanu returned to his peaceful routine, occasionally glancing out at the empty pool, he couldn't help but smile. Those teenagers had brought unexpected joy into his life, reminding him of the power of human connection. In helping them grow, he had grown too. Sometimes, the simplest acts of kindness could create ripples that reached farther than anyone imagined. Months passed, and life in the neighborhood returned to its usual rhythm. The pool sat quiet, covered for the season, and Keanu's backyard was no longer the bustling hub it had been during those warm summer nights. But the impact of what had happened lingered like an invisible thread, weaving its way through the lives of everyone involved. The teenagers, once restless and unsure of themselves, now carried a sense of purpose that hadn't been there before. And Keanu, though he cherished his solitude, found himself smiling more often, reminded of how much joy those kids had brought into his life. One spring afternoon, as the first buds appeared on the trees, Keanu received a letter in the mail. It wasn't anything fancy, just a plain white envelope with his name written in careful handwriting. But it caught his attention immediately. Inside was a note from Mia, one of the teens who had spent countless evenings by his pool. She thanked him for everything he'd done for her and the others, saying his kindness had changed the way she saw the world. "I used to think adults didn't care about us," she wrote, "but you showed me that some people really do. Because of you, I'm not afraid to try new things anymore." The letter ended with an invitation. Mia and the others wanted Keanu to attend their high school graduation ceremony. They had all worked hard throughout the year, determined to finish strong, and they wanted him there to celebrate their achievements. Keanu read the note several times, his heart swelling with pride. He hadn't expected this kind of gratitude, but it meant more to him than any award or accolade ever could. Without hesitation, he sent back a reply. "Of course I'll be there." On the day of the ceremony, Keanu arrived early, dressed casually but neatly. He stood near the back of the auditorium, blending in with the crowd of parents and relatives. When the graduates filed in, wearing caps and gowns, he spotted Mia and the others right away. Their faces lit up when they saw him, waving enthusiastically, despite the solemnity of the occasion. As each name was called and students walked across the stage to receive their diplomas, Keanu clapped louder than anyone else. He felt a surge of emotion watching them. These kids who had once sneaked into his pool were now stepping confidently into adulthood. After the ceremony, the group gathered outside, laughing and hugging as cameras flashed all around them. When they spotted Keanu approaching, they rushed over, pulling him into their circle. "We couldn't have done it without you," Jake said, his voice thick with emotion. Others nodded in agreement, sharing stories of how Keanu's advice and encouragement had helped them push through tough times. One girl mentioned how she had applied to art school because of the confidence he'd instilled in her. Another boy talked about landing a part-time job after taking Keanu's suggestion to focus on teamwork and responsibility. Keanu listened, quietly, humbled by their words. "You did all the hard work," he told them. "I just gave you a little nudge." But they wouldn't hear it. To them, he was more than just a neighbor or mentor. He was proof that kindness could change lives. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the parking lot, the group decided to end the day with one last visit to Keanu's backyard. Though the pool was still covered, the space felt familiar and comforting, like returning to a favorite childhood spot. They spread out blankets and sat together, reminiscing about the summer nights that had brought them here. Someone joked about how nervous they'd been when Keanu first caught them sneaking in, and everyone burst into laughter. Even Keanu chuckled, shaking his head at the memory. But beneath the humor lay a deeper understanding. Those late-night swims had been more than just mischief. They had been the start of something transformative. For the teens, it was the moment they realized they mattered, that their actions could lead to growth rather than regret. For Keanu, it was a reminder of the importance of connection, of reaching out instead of pushing away. Together, they had created something rare and beautiful, a bond built on trust, respect, and shared humanity. Before leaving, the group made a promise to stay in touch. They planned to meet up regularly, whether it was at Keanu's house or somewhere else, to check in on each other and share updates about their lives. "We're family now," one of the boys declared, and no one disagreed. Family wasn't always about blood. It was about the people who supported you, believed in you, and stood by you no matter what. As the years went by, Keanu continued to hear from the teens. Some sent him photos of their college dorm rooms or shared news about new jobs. Others visited him whenever they were back in town, bringing friends along to meet the man who had once turned trespassers into dreamers. Each message or visit filled Keanu with gratitude, reinforcing his belief in the power of compassion and understanding. Looking back on that summer, Keanu knew it had been special, not because of the pool parties or bonfires, but because of the relationships that had grown out of them. What started as a simple act of forgiveness had blossomed into something extraordinary, touching lives in ways he never could have predicted. And while he remained humble about his role in their journey, the teens never forgot the lessons he had taught them, or the man who had shown them that even the smallest choices could leave a lasting legacy. In the end, the story of the teenagers who snuck into Keanu Reeves' pool became more than just a tale of mischief and redemption. It was a testament to the idea that kindness, patience, and empathy could bridge gaps between strangers and turn unlikely encounters into lifelong connections. And though the pool itself eventually fell silent, the ripples it had created continued to spread, reminding everyone who heard the story that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with a single leap of faith.